welcome back to our insightful Humans of Nature podcast series. We're your hosts, Basindra
and Ratambra,
and we're thrilled to embark on this journey with you. Today we have a special guest joining us who is an eminent expert in the field of marine mammal behavior and conservation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hal Whitehead.
It's an absolute honor to have you on our show today. As a renowned researcher and author, you have made significant contributions to our understanding of marine life and intricate social dynamics that exist within the communities. Your work has captivated the attention of both scientific and general audiences alike. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Would you like to say a few words about yourself for our listeners who may not be familiar with your background?
Sure. So my name's Hal Whitehead, and I'm a professor at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I'm lucky enough to spend a lot of my time at sea on a 40-foot, 12-meter sailing boat. And so when we're out there, we go and find the whales and then try and follow them and observe their behavior, and from that we try and figure out what's going on.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction to your impressive work. Now let's dive right into the heart of your research. Can you give us an overview of your extensive studies on whale social structure and behavior, and what led you to focus on this particular aspect of marine biology?
Yeah, well, I spent time out there with the whales, and I think, like many of us do, we become interested as we look at other humans or other animals, we become interested in their relationships with each other, their social structures. So, when dogs meet, we look and watch and see what they do and what noises they make and how they treat each other and so on. And the whales are much more mysterious because it's much harder for us to get into their world. And so for me, the mysteries were even bigger. So I really wanted to figure out, well, what is the social life of a whale like? And it was a big challenge because we see very little of them. We hear some more of them, but they're much more acoustically, more sound-oriented than we are. So there were a lot of challenges, and we haven't got super far, but we've got far enough to find out some things which seem pretty interesting, at least to me.
Yeah, and the discovery of cultural diversity among the whale population opens up a whole new realm of understanding their social lives. So thank you for sharing that insight. And now turning to your book, The Cultural Lives of Whales and Dolphins, you delve into the topic of cultural traditions amongst these creatures. Can you explain to our audience what these traditions entail and how they are transmitted within whale populations?
Sure. So culture is basically what an individual learns from other individuals and then can pass on again to another bunch of individuals. So it's things, for instance, that your teachers themselves learned at school and then pass on to you, or they're things that your parents learned from their parents and then pass on to you. And it's the same with whales and other animals. But particularly with whales, because they have a very strong relationship, particularly with their mothers. So a lot of whales they're born what we call precocial. So unlike baby humans or baby dogs, they don't just lie around. From the moment they're born, they have to keep swimming with their mum, or in some species with other members of their social group. So they're swimming along for up to certainly a year, but up to 5 years, and occasionally for their whole lifetimes with their mothers and their other relatives. And as they do this, they learn about their world, how they interact with their world. And their world includes the things they eat, the things that might eat them, like killer whales or humans when we were back whaling, as well as their social world, how to deal with each other. What are the social conventions? What do you do when you meet a whale who you don't know very well? So just as with humans, we have social conventions. So in some parts of the world, we may shake hands if we meet someone we don't know very well. In other parts of the world, we don't do that. We do something completely different. So those are social conventions. And what we found is that the whales are learning a whole bunch of stuff from each other. They're learning about what to eat, how to move around the ocean, maybe how to migrate between places they spend the winter and places they spend the summer, what sounds to make. So again, we learn our languages from our parents and others around in our childhood, and the whales do too. So this is their culture, and it's my opinion that this is incredibly important to them. So a whale isn't a whale without all that stuff that it's learned from the other whales. I guess what I try and do is get a feel for what this is, what they're learning, how important it is, how they pass it on, who they pass it on to, because we have some kinds of our culture which are passed on generally parent to offspring. So typically our languages, our religions come from our parents, at least originally. Whereas other aspects of our lives, like perhaps our clothes or our taste in music, come more from our peer group, the other individuals about our own age. And so it seems for the whales. Obviously, they don't wear clothes, but they do things like having sort of games that they like playing. Like for a while, the killer whales off the west coast of Canada, a group of them started to push dead salmon around, and that was their thing. For a few months, everyone had a dead salmon, and they pushed it around, and then it was no longer cool. They stopped. That was the end of it. And so that was a kind of culture passed on from between the peers. Oh, he's doing it, she's doing it, I got to do that too. Or now they're not doing it, so I'll stop as well. Other kinds of parts of their culture, for instance, what they eat or their dialects, are learned primarily from the older generation, from their parents and aunts and so on.
Yeah, it's not very different from us if we think about it, our social lives and the way that we communicate. And it's really incredible how these behaviors are passed down through generations, contributing to the diversity and both resilience of these creatures. So, now shifting gears, I'd like to discuss the impact of human activities on whale populations, an area of research that you have also focused on. Can you enlighten us on some of the major threats that whales face today and what measures can be taken to mitigate these threats?
Sure. So let's first go back a bit. So for centuries, whaling was a really important part of human life and the economies of humans. So if you go back about 200 years, the oil industry was based around oil that was got from whales that had been killed. So during this long period, huge numbers of whales were killed and people made a lot of money out of them. But they also got useful things like light and oil they could lubricate machinery with and so on. But if we focus on the whales themselves, they were being killed and killed and killed. And so if we go back to the 1960s, when I was a teenager, the whale populations were in extremely serious state. They were a fraction of what they had been for all the large whale species, and they were heading towards zero very fast. So it was, I think, one of the more wonderful things of humanity, and we've done a lot of things which aren't very wonderful. But in the 1970s, we got out of that. We communally, the human population basically decided, no, we're not going to go whaling. It's not a good idea. It's not sustainable. And these whales are more than the margarine we're getting from them. And it took a little while, but we stopped. And that was all over the world, well, pretty much all over the world. So when we get to about the early 1980s, the whale populations were a tiny fraction of what they had been, but the whaling had stopped. And since then, so that's in the last 40 years or so, many of the whale populations have rebuilt. So, given the general doom and gloom about our environmental situation, this is one small ray of light that we took the action, and at least in most cases it worked. There are a few it didn't, such as the North Atlantic right whales here off eastern Canada and eastern United States, who are still in desperate shape. And there are a number of other populations, but overall it was a good thing. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. So we don't go around killing them deliberately anymore, or only in a very, very minor way. But we're doing all kinds of other things to the oceans which aren't good for them. So there are things like putting plastics in the ocean. A dead whale is full of bits of plastic that have gone down our sewage pipes and into the ocean. The whales are sound-oriented animals. They depend on sound to sense their environment. So down in the ocean, you can't see very far. A blue whale, the biggest of all the whales, normally can't see its tail. It's just too murky. Smelling doesn't work very well in the ocean. And obviously you've got to eat something to taste it or be right up against them to touch it. The major sense in the ocean is sound. So the whales are listening for the sounds of the ocean. Some of them are making sounds and listening for the echoes of their sounds, of things they might eat, of the bottom, of other things in the ocean. So sound is their primary sense. And sound does very well in the ocean. Some sounds you can hear at hundreds of kilometers. But unfortunately, one of the things we're doing is making the oceans a lot noisier. So as our commerce expands, we put more and more big ships into the ocean. Those ships are noisy. We explore for oil. The process of exploring for oil is extremely noisy. So the noise in the ocean is going up and up and up every year. And that's bad news for the whales. Because it's as though in our world, the world was getting foggier and foggier and foggier every year. We would see less far, we would see less detail, and it's the same for them. So that's not good. We're catching a lot of the fish that they depend upon. That's not good. We're putting out all kinds of fishing gear into the ocean, which they get snagged upon. That's not good. So those are a few of the threats they're facing at the moment, all of which seem to be getting worse. But obviously the big one out there is climate change. We are changing the climate of the whole planet, and that includes the oceans. And it's a little harder to see how that's affecting the whales directly than it is for some animals on Earth, which we can study much more clearly. But the evidence is growing that it is affecting them in a number of ways, and usually in bad ways. So, yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about for the conservation of whales.
That's very unfortunate because we would have never guessed that whales were being killed for oil. And we always need to highlight these major threats that whales face due to human activities. And it's really clear that, as you mentioned, reducing noise pollution, addressing climate change, we need to do that and promote the education and awareness, which is really essential. And us as individuals ourselves, we can all play a role in supporting these efforts and making a positive impact to help like save this deteriorating whale population that you mentioned. And now for our following question. Our listeners who are interested in getting involved in whale conservation efforts, what recommendations do you have? Like, are there any citizen science programs, volunteer opportunities, or initiatives that you would suggest?
Yes, I'm not super familiar with them myself, but certainly are. There are volunteer positions with a whole range of organizations. If you live near any of the coastlines, there is usually a stranding network which deals with whales and other large marine animals which end up on the shore. And this can be for a number of reasons. It can be because they're sick or old or injured or dead. But it's often because something's happened to them because of our activities. So, for instance, they may be tangled in fishing gear. They may have been scared by a very loud sound that we make. And so these stranding organizations depend heavily on volunteers. They need to train the volunteers. So it isn't something you just walk into one day and lugging dolphins off a beach the next. But after a bit of training, that's what the sort of thing that you do. And it's very, very important, obviously, for the animals themselves. So a lot of them can't be saved, but some of them can be saved, and it's great if they can. It's also the scientific information that's collected from them. So, for instance, by looking at what the reason why they've ended up in this really sad situation is it because they're entrapped in fishing gear? Is it because they've been hit by a ship? We need to know these things. And if we know them, then we can pinpoint what the risks are. And for instance, here off eastern Canada and the northeast United States, fishing effort is being managed and closed down to try and protect the animals which are most at risk. And a lot of the information as to these risks come from these poor creatures who've ended up on the beach. So that's one thing. There are organizations which keep track of the living whales. So if you're lucky enough to get out on the ocean or to be on a point of land where you can look out over the ocean, then your observations of what you see can be very important. Of course, you've got to learn the different species you might see. But once you've done that, it can be extremely useful to scientists. We can learn what animals are where, when. Again, that can be used to try and monitor, to manage things like the fishing industry or shipping, to get boats to slow down at a particular place at a particular time. But I think even more important is that there are groups of people like yourselves who are out there pushing for us to really try and look after the whole global environment, to try and get the pollution out so that global warming slows down, so that the plastics in the ocean are less. Now, we can do a bit ourselves by making sure that our plastics, we use as few plastics as we can, and also that the ones we do use go into a recycled or otherwise disposed of in a responsible way. But we need leadership at the top, and leadership at the top comes from pressure from everyone else, like yourselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's not only important to like join these organizations, it's important to like know where the problem is and how to make it like better and like reduce the problem. So you've been in this field for a while now. So have you recently witnessed any significant policy changes or conservation initiatives that have positively impacted the whale populations?
Yeah, I mean, there have been some. One which has received a fair amount of attention here in Eastern Canada is for the North Atlantic right whale. This is a species which hasn't really recovered from whaling. There's just a few hundred left, and they aren't doing well. They seem to be declining. They're getting hit by ships. They're getting caught in fishing gear, and very few of them lead a natural, healthy life because they have fishing gear around them. They have been injured and so on. It's a pretty desperate situation. But and to complicate things, and this is probably related to global warming, a few years ago, they moved from their prime location in the Bay of Fundy to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a water body not very far north by distance, but by ocean a long way north. They have to go all the way around a fair bit of eastern Canada to get there. So they get into this new area, and there's a whole bunch of fishing gear there. There are ships going back and forth, and initially many of them were killed in this new area. But the Canadian government, with working with fishers, with conservation groups, with American scientists, and so on, has put in some measures which seem to be helping a lot. So they where there's an area where there are a lot of whales around, they'll stop the fishing. They'll impose speed limits on the ships passing through so that they're less likely to injure the animals. So whether that's enough to stop these guys going extinct, I don't know, but at least it's going in the right direction, and the number of whale deaths in this area have gone well down over the last few years. On a slightly more optimistic note, I work mainly on whales further offshore, and we study some whales about 100 miles off the coast here, off Nova Scotia, in a canyon. And these are called northern bottlenose whales, and they were also heavily whaled, like most other whales, well, pretty much all other whales. But their population was still going down when we started working there about 35 years ago. And this was probably because they were getting caught in fishing gear, and there were noises from oil and gas and so on. Anyway, a marine protected area was put in for them, and this was about 20 years ago. A marine protected area was put in to protect this canyon where they live, and it looks like the population of these whales, which there's only a few hundred of them, which was declining after their habitat was protected. So there was no fishing gear there. The oil and gas industry was kept well away. They started increasing again, slowly, but it's encouraging. So there are things that are happening which are helping, but I guess these are all rather band-aid approaches. We really have to do something about global warming. We really have to do something about plastics on a global scale. And we really have to do something about ocean noise on a global scale.
Yeah, it's good to see that some organizations are actually taking action into helping reduce all the negative impacts in this global realm. So,
Before we conclude, we'd like to ask you one final question related to studying whales. And It's throughout your career in whale research. Could you share a memorable experience that has left a lasting impact on you?
Sure. This is a slightly enigmatic one, but I think it expresses quite a lot for me. Um, I've studied sperm whales for a long time, and I particularly remember a time, this was off the coast of Chile, um, and I was on my boat with my close colleague, who I've worked with for a long time, and the whales were all around us, and they were doing wild things. Their tails were going up, they were leaping out of the water, they were swiveling around, and we were sitting there watching them. And I asked my colleague, I said, have you any idea what they're doing? And he said, nope. And I said, neither have I. And these are animals I've been studying at that point for 20 years or so, and he for a fair amount of time as well. And there's still so much mystery out there, right? We don't know what's going on. I still look at these animals I've tried to study for so very long and think how little I know. So not only should we be protecting them for themselves and for the richness they give us, but we don't want to lose all those mysteries they have within them.
Yeah, you usually see like the scene of like whales jumping and twirling in the water in like movies and stuff, and it's really cool that you got to see it like live in person. So, so as we come to the end of this episode, I would like to express our deepest gratitude for the invaluable insights you have provided. Your dedication to understanding and conserving the wonders of natural world is truly inspiring.
And to our listeners, we hope that this episode has not only deepened your appreciation for the incredible diversity of life on our planet, but has also ignited a sense of responsibility within all of you. Like each one of us has the power to make a positive impact on our environment and the species that call it home. Let's remember the lessons that we've learned from Dr. Whitehead and the stories he just shared. Let's strive to cultivate like a harmonious relationship with both nature and respecting it and protecting its delicate balance. Thank you for joining us on this special journey into the realm of humans of nature. Thank you, and stay tuned for more inspiring episodes where we delve into the stories and experiences that remind us of our deep connection to the natural world.